On a Wednesday, we talk business, so welcome to Business 7. This program, a special focus on Namibia's upcoming national budget, which will be tabled tomorrow by Finance Minister Ipumbu Shimi. Now, in this program, we spoke to three experts on various aspects of the budget to gauge their feeling and their expectations around the budget. First up is now Fiku Hamunimi. She's from a Standard Bank Namibia. We'll also talk to Johan Nel from PwC Namibia and to Warren Kathangwizi from Liberty Life Namibia. Please stay tuned. Hello now, Fiku. Thank you very much for joining us. And we're starting off with you because the economy of this country will be the scene setter for the budget. In a nutshell, what is the current state of the Namibian economy and how has it affected government finances?
All right. Okay, so firstly, thank you so much for that question. I think it's a great way for us to start off this morning's discussion. So essentially, in terms of where the economy is at the moment, essentially it's been 2 years since the onset of the pandemic, and it's been almost 6 years since the Namibian economy first came close to recessionary territory. However, with that said, it's still fair to say, despite the restrictions that were imposed last year because of the third wave that we experienced, the Namibian economy is still set to grow for 2021. So the Bank of Namibia actually projected that the economy grew by 1.5%, which was a significant improvement from the 8.5% contraction that we actually saw in 2020. And so going into 2022 and also going into the medium term, we are expecting for growth to continue to accelerate. So it's projected that the economy will grow by 3.3% in the current year and then 4% in 2023. And much of this growth really will be supported by, I guess, easing COVID-19 restrictions and also recoveries across almost all of our sectors. However, with that said, it's still quite important to highlight the fact that most of the recovery we're expecting to see is going to come about essentially as a result of the very low base that was created by the pandemic. And in addition to that, it's also important to highlight that the risks that are facing the fiscus or the government, so to speak, are still very real when it comes to the pandemic. And I know it's quite difficult for people to see that because life is, it's starting to normalize. We're seeing easing COVID-19 restrictions, but the risks are still very real. And I think the year in which we really saw the damage that the pandemic did to the government's finances was in 2020. So essentially, I think as most people are familiar, in 2020, the government had to essentially increase expenditure quite significantly. And they did this in the short run in order to obviously support very hard-hit industries and also to support the most vulnerable members within our community. And as a direct result of that, essentially, we saw that expenditure increased by about 4.6 billion between 2019 and 2020. And so essentially, the net effect of that was that the budget deficit increased quite drastically. So it went up from 5 to 8% between 2019 and 2020. And then when we look at our debt, it also picked up quite significantly, going up from 56 to 62% as a percentage of GDP. And so all the work that the government had been doing in terms of the fiscal consolidation essentially was derailed, so to speak. And And so even as we're looking at the current budget now, as we're having the easing restrictions, the risk is still very there. This is because, if you look at our economy, we only have about 14% of our population being fully vaccinated. And so the threat is real because essentially it leaves our economy vulnerable to, additional waves or additional surges, which could result in restrictions being put in place. And so essentially what that would mean for the economy is that firstly, that growth that we're anticipating to see might not materialize. And for the government, this would mean that they would have reduced revenue because there is not as much consumer and business activity taking place. And also in a worst case scenario, we could see what happened in 2020 happen all over again, where they have to increase expenditure in order to support the economy. And we're in a situation where you have, increased expenditure, reduced revenue. This obviously will mean, again, it will derail the government's efforts essentially to, kind of maintain the budget deficit and also try to lower public debt. So that essentially is the situation we're finding ourselves from an economic perspective.
Now, Fico, indeed, Minister Shimi hasn't got an easy task. I wouldn't like to be in his shoes. You touched on it very briefly just now. Revenue. We've seen it being problematic over the past couple of years. What are the current prospects for revenue?
Yeah. So, revenue essentially is key to the majority of the discussions we're going to have. And over the past few years, we've definitely seen that several lines of government revenue have come under pressure. And essentially the net effect or result of this is that revenue as a percentage of GDP has definitely decreased. So we've seen that for 2020, it's gone down from 2020 where it was at about 32.5% to last year it came down to 28.8%. And for the current budget that's going to be tabled, the expectation is that it's going to fall even further to 27.5%. And this essentially is much lower than the average that we've seen over the past 5 years, where it's been sitting at about 32%. And so I guess for viewers who are curious as to why it is that the revenue is coming down so significantly, the main cause is essentially the dip in SACU revenue. And so SACU revenue is essentially revenue that's coming from the Southern African Customs Union. And this essentially is kind of a result, or it comes essentially out of economic activity from the main member states within SACU. And so what we saw was that between 2020 and 2021, SACU revenue essentially fell by about 33%, which translated to a decrease in about 7.5 billion in terms of tax revenue. So that was quite a significant decline. And so even going into the upcoming budget, according to the Ministry of Finance's own projections, they are anticipating that again, SACU revenue will be lower than anticipated. So I think it's expected to be less than 1.7 billion in comparison to the 2021 financial year. So that is quite significant. And it's only from 2023 onwards really that it's expected to pick up as economic activity really starts to recover from COVID-19 across the region. So that's something that's quite notable. But if we look at other revenue lines, so for example, domestic tax on goods and services, which essentially is VAT, we have seen that it did actually pick up from 2020. And this is essentially because last year we didn't have the very stringent and hard lockdown that we experienced in 2020. So it's expected, last year it increased by about 2 billion, and going into the upcoming budget, it's expected to increase again. And it's a similar picture if we look at tax on income and profits, which is the largest contributor to domestic tax.
Thank you very, very much. Now, Fico, you are an absolute wonder when it comes to just giving those figures. Thank you for giving us the perspective and putting this discussion into context.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
A lot has changed in the past 160 plus years, but the world is evolving faster every day. Founder Samuel Lowell Price's version of a self-driving car was a really smart horse. Who knows how our great-grandchildren will get around? Here at PwC, we know we're responsible for guiding our people, clients, and communities through this constant change. How do we engage the more than 220,000 people across 157 countries in the PwC network? Through a clear and simple purpose, to build trust in society and solve important problems. What that really means is, in between our morning coffees and our evening commutes home, we all live and breathe the same core values. Here they are, the 5 things that make us, us. We act with integrity. We speak up for what's right, even when it's the harder option. We make a difference. We stay informed and proactively look for ways to better our world. We care about each other, about our clients and stakeholders, about empowering everyone to do their best. We work together. We know feedback, collaboration, and diverse perspectives help us deliver the highest quality outcomes. We reimagine the possible. Nothing great ever came from sticking with the status quo. We always challenge ourselves to innovate. Our values make us who we are and will help propel us toward the legacy we've envisioned for the future. A sentiment Sam and his horse would have definitely stood behind.
In our previous segment, we looked at revenue, and to elaborate on that, who better than tax experts? We welcome Johan Nel from PricewaterhouseCoopers Namibia. Johan, let's get into it straight away. Do you expect any huge tax amendments in the budget?
I would like to say yes. That is the expectation. I think there's been a number of tax amendments that's been coming for a long time. Announcements have been made. We've seen some draft bills being circulated to industry for commentary. So we hope that there's more clarity now during the budget speech, and specifically when this tax changes will be applicable. So some of the major things we're looking at is there's been a lot of talk about local withholding tax on dividends, which will hit not only businesses but individuals as well. There's a 10% withholding tax on local dividends received. Then there's the big one for individuals that want to deduct pension, retirement and study policies. That limit is currently still 40,000. We're hoping that gets pushed up to 150,000. We really need the effective date because people need to plan and see how they, otherwise we just end up with a lot of administration regarding payroll taxes. Then on thin capitalization, there was also an announcement to introduce a ratio of a 3-to-1 debt to equity ratio that will help businesses in Namibia to have more profits locked into the country and not just have multinationals ship out excessive interest and in effect eroding the tax base in Namibia. The other one that's quite topical is the VAT on asset management fees, which is going to have a big impact in the financial services industry, and unfortunately this charge will essentially be pushed down to the individuals, and your pension will be worth less as a result of this management fees. The one that's also quite a hot topic is in terms of the trusts. So currently all trusts are taxed as individuals. There is a recommendation out there to change this to make trading trusts being taxed like a company, which will also mean then that if there's a dividend declaration by this company or a distribution from the trust to a beneficiary, that this will be seen as a dividend and therefore another withholding tax. So people that have put up structures over years to save taxes and to increase their wealth will be hit by this new, some of these tax amendments.
Johan, one of the ongoing discussions in Namibia is the policy environment. What do you expect from the budget in terms of policy announcements?
So I think it will be good to have, again, this is all expectations or let's call it a wish list from our side. Things like NIEF has been on the cards for a long time, the Namibia Investment Promotion Act. We've seen now the whole shift with hydrogen. If you watch the news, you see Hyphen Energy is there. We've seen the Altavierlist group having a joint venture with a Belgian company. And all of this is new groundbreaking stuff. We need policies and we need certainty for investors to know that if they invest in the country, what are going to be the tax implications, what are going to be the risks that they need to be aware of up front, because if we don't have that policy and certainty, people are not willing to throw the cash in and do the FDI. So hopefully we get in this budget speech a sense of new policies that will maybe guide the industry, specifically when it comes to foreign direct investment, to give international investors that feeling of security when they invest into Namibia.
Another one of the buzzwords over the past couple of years is the concept of ESG. Can you explain that to us and elaborate on that in terms of the budget?
Yeah, sure. So ESG is all about your impact in terms of environmental impact, societal impact, and your governance. So it ranges basically from whether you use solar energy to whether you pay your employees fair, in terms of governance structure on boards. But essentially it's about how do you report on environmental, societal, and governance issues. And a lot of the private equity players in the global sector have now started to say that ESG must be a part of your strategy, otherwise they're not willing to invest. You see some banks moving that way in terms of financing, specifically when it comes to big projects. So I think it's important that as a country, whether we think we need ESG or not, because Namibia's got a lot of sunlight and we're not overpopulated, so a lot of people can say, yes, it's not necessary that we focus on these things because our environment in Namibia is fine. But the reality is that the global markets are moving to this, and the sooner we as a country get on board and get certain requirements and reporting in line, the better it will be for our economy. Because when people invest from overseas, and when we talk about foreign direct investment, they want to see what is the effect of these projects. And as I said, it's not only, a lot of people only focus on the ESG, but there's a lot of things for society, fair labor practices, all of that we need to take into account. So I think if there's something that we can start with, it's just how will government assist people in reporting this? I'm not saying make it mandatory, but is there guidelines on what we can report, and how we can sort of ring fence certain funds as well, to make sure that it gets utilized for the environment.
Very interesting perspectives. Thank you very much for joining us, Johan.
Thanks.
You know, a few weeks ago, I would never do this on a Saturday morning. Back then, I was standing in line all day. Now it's just like that.
You are using the FNB banking app like I told you.
Girl, it saved my weekend. Now I can do all my banking on this.
Payments, transfers, checking statements.
Even opening accounts.
Just like that.
Oh, did I tell you what my husband did?
Even me, I want to save time with the, what's the name of the app?
FNB app.
Don't be left behind. Make the switch to the FNB app, online banking or cell phone banking, and change the way you bank to change your life. FNB, how can we help you?
If there's one thing that's very important in budgets, it's the issue of pension funds, retirement, etc. Welcome, Warren Kathangwizi. You are the man to put this into perspective for us. One of the main topics of discussion lately was the increase in deductibility of pension fund contributions. In a nutshell, what is it and how is it going to impact the industry?
Thank you for having me. Definitely. I think it's an exciting part for the pension fund industry at this point in time, but at the same time, it's an exciting part for the actual members that are, belong to pension funds. So the increase is currently the tax deductibility is at 40,000, and that is tabled to be increased to 150,000. Now, we know that it's been documented across the world that increasing pension fund savings and assets ideally would lead to more activity within the economy. So it is an exciting time in terms of, so what would this mean for the overall Namibian economy? However, with such deductibilities or increases. I think the government just needs to address certain other elements also in terms of there is a possible additional tax that's going to be levied on asset managers, how that will impact the actual member and their savings. And as we all know, the initial 40,000 is quite a, if I can call it, antiquated and old type of regime. So ideally, as a pension fund member, when you belong to a pension fund, there's a 2/3 element that you need to be able to buy a pension for. And buying a pension with just about 50,000 or a livelihood afterwards is quite low. So increasing it to 150,000 gives the member that option of at least having a decent pension that they could actually live on for the rest of their lives.
Warren, we're in our 3rd year of the COVID-19 pandemic. How has the whole pandemic impacted the retirement fund industry?
Yes, 3rd year. It's quite strange. You know, while we get used to the pandemic and you get used to the last 24 months and almost now going on to the 3 years of the pandemic, what we have seen in the pension fund industry is quite a lot of members sort of retired earlier, and that was predominantly because they just needed access to their pension fund savings. It's quite a shame, but that's the reality, because the harsh environment of the economy was one of the matters that they needed to take into account. So we've seen quite a lot of increases in terms of people actually leaving pension funds. What that means is that pension fund contributions globally and not just in Namibia has reduced, fund liquidity has increased, and then of course also how that will play for the asset managers is that they have less funds to be able to sort of live up to the benchmarks or the promises that they've made to these individual funds. So that's what we've seen a lot over the last 2 years, that members are actually now retiring soon and not at an element where they can afford to, but it's because they needed the access to those funds.
That's rather a worrying a trend. I can understand the relief in the short term, but it's going to have a huge impact in the long term.
Definitely. I mean, pension fund savings is not a short to medium term type of element, right? When you save, you ideally want to be in a pension fund from anywhere from 35 years to longer. Then you'll see elements like your net replacement ratio coming into part, where you'll actually retire with a decent amount of salary, and then you can live in, you know, your glory years, as they put it. But at the moment, it is a worrying thing, because if you can't feed yourself every day, how do you think about the future? And those are the elements that we're facing. So within organizations such as ourselves, or in the industry such as ourselves, having engagement with these members at this point in time, asking them to look at other elements of how they could, you know, sort of tighten the belt, if you can put it that way, are elements that we need to look at, on the responsibility that we need to put on ourselves as sort of leaders in this industry, to maybe have conversations of, do you actually need that cup of coffee that you buy every day? You know, can you make it a little bit leaner? Can you go on water? Those are the type of things that you just have to look at. But ideally, how do you stop someone from pulling from a resource that they need to have if they can't feed their family and themselves on a daily basis?
And a lot of talk lately also about the post-pandemic world and how it's going to look in terms of businesses, corporates, etc. Liberty Life, how is it going to approach this issue?
So I had a chuckle with my MD the other day, and we spoke about, you know, we've had our formal qualifications, we've done our masters and our MBAs, and I don't think anything could have prepared you for what the last 2-3 years was. So that was an MBA in itself, right? So as a business, you had to really become agile, you had to become lean, you had to think forward. And you were requested to do that in a matter of a month, sometimes even shorter. So for us, as Liberty, what the post-pandemic look like is literally agility, being able to put in strategies on a shorter period, change strategies if it doesn't work, because a strategy is ideally based on some, you know, majority and number based, right? But at the same element, you're also looking at, okay, what has your counterparts done? What are the people in the first world countries do? So agility is a big part. Automation is key, as we saw that a couple of months, the lockdown happened, we were left at home, we had to all get onto Teams meetings, and we had to find that way of interacting with one another. So in terms of automation, it's a big pull as an organization for us to automate most of our processes, automate the way that we engage with individuals. And I think it's more of a learning, right? It's a challenge. We've risen to the challenge, and now we're looking at implementing better methods and to be able to take our organization into the future.
Very valid points. Thank you very much for joining us, Warren.
Thank you for having me once again.
While Namibia and its cities are seen as one of the cleanest countries in Africa, plastic pollution is a big problem. Therefore, it's up to each of us to do what we can to reduce the use of plastic, especially single-use plastic bags. At Liberty Life Namibia, we've taken the decision to turn all our old branding items into reusable shopping bags. It's a way in which we can drive sustainability and look after our most important stakeholder, our environment. If you also believe in sustainability and would like more information, please get in touch. Liberty Life Namibia. In it with you.
Big expectations. Hopefully some of what is on the wish list of Namibians will bear fruit in the upcoming budget. Please join us next Wednesday again when we will be looking at the budget and dissecting it in more detail. Until then, stay safe.